Welcome back, Covalence friends. Today we're going to be using an older repo to show you a little trick that I learned where we can actually resize an image on the client. So this is extremely helpful for just saving processing power. If you don't want to be resizing images on your server, you can actually try this trick. And there is a fallback as well where you can actually just allow it to fall back and upload the whole image if it doesn't end up working for this particular image, because it is memory intensive and there is some actual processing involved, but it's an extremely helpful tool to kind of utilize the client side of your application and other people's computers to handle and offload some of that processing power. So let's go ahead and get right into it. All right, so we're starting out with the file upload repo. I just cloned it, changed it to image resize, and I npm installed. So we are good to get started. Let's go with opening the app.ts, which is in public/js. And you can see that we already have a lot of our elements already grabbed. And we already have a form submit on here, but we're going to kind of rearrange some things. So basically we're going to move, right now we're checking if the input exists on submit. We can go ahead and we can move this. Let's go ahead and just pull all of that out. We'll move that up here and we'll add an else if and add an else if here as well. So you don't have to do this, but I don't know, it's a personal preference thing and I prefer to do the if else ifs. And then what we can do is we're checking if input.files here, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new function. So we're going to say function onChange, and this onChange function is going to fire when the input changes. So whenever we select the file, this input will fire the change event. And whenever we see this change event, we're actually going to resize the image. And instead of grabbing the file off the input itself, we're going to have a global file. So we can go ahead and create that variable as well. And we're going to be able to change that in the onChange. So let's go ahead and add the input.add event listener, and it'll be change onChange false. And this will go ahead and fire whenever there's a change event. So this is the function that's going to get fired. We can go ahead and we can look at input.files in here. So we'll go if not input.files, danger, no input files, and we'll remove it from there as well. So we can now delete this and we'll add the else if here. All right, so this file is going to be looking at this file now. And so on the onChange, what we're going to do is we are going to set that file. So we're going to say input.file0. And then we're going to look at file reader. So again, we can also take a look at this. So we can say, if not input.files, else if not file reader. We'll do another console.log return no file reader. All right, so we'll know what's going on there. And we can say if not file. Why don't we say, we can actually do this twice. So instead of this, we'll say if not file, file equals input.file0. And we can move this as well inside this. All right, so we should be good. So we're going to set that file here. This is kind of a fallback, just to make sure that it works in every case. Even if file reader doesn't exist, we're not going to break the actual image upload itself. It just will not resize. So resizing is an optimization. We're just going to kind of make sure that the optimization doesn't break the functionality, right? All right, so now we have our file set, and we're going to actually create a new reader. So we can say const reader equals new file reader. All right, let me actually go ahead and move this microphone real quick just so I don't try and kill your ears. I don't know if this actually affects much, but we're going to leave that in though. Hopefully you can hear me now. Just unplugged the mic, but now we might have a little bit less keyboard noise. All right, so we now have our file reader, and we're going to say reader.onload equals a new function, And we could have an onError function too, but we're not going to worry about the onError function since we already set the file here. So basically, if you needed to do something additional, you could in the onError, but we don't really need to. So we're just going to now do the reader function, which is going to be, well, I guess let's just do it for error, or for consistency's sake. We'll put the error function in there, and for debugging purposes, all we're going to do is console.log file reader error. All right, so then we're going to do reader.read as data URL, and what we're going to pass in is the actual file. So we're passing in input.file0, and then when it's on load, we'll actually have the file read. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to create a new image. So we're going to say const image equals new image. And you could do a check if for the image, if this actually exists. But again, almost all browsers nowadays have this, so I wouldn't worry about it. But what we're going to do is we're going to do an image.onload function. And in this image.onload function is we're going to do the kind of all the magic, right? We're going to create the canvas, and we're going to use canvas to kind of do all this, right? You could also do an image.onError function if you want. But for the most part, what we're going to do is we're going to say image.source equals reader event, which is going to be what's passed in here, right? So that's going to be our reader event, and we're going to say reader event dot target dot result, right? So that's going to be set to the image source. So we actually have to cast that to a string. All right, so it's going to read it as a data URL, which is going to be, I believe, base64. I could be wrong. I'd have to check for sure on that, but our image.source is going to be set to this, and it's then going to load whatever this image is. Now this is memory intensive, so if the image you're loading is massive, it could break this. So you got to be a little bit careful on what image you're actually going to be uploading here. But again, I wouldn't worry about it too much, and you can always check the file.size here. So you could actually just say, if file.size is greater than a certain amount, then just alert that the file is too big and you only support something of a certain size. So why don't we just leave it at that for now. We'll say that it doesn't matter because I'm pretty sure my memory and my computer could support almost any image we give it. So we're going to just have faith that it'll work. So, all right. Let's see. What you could do as an additional check is going to be, let's see. In this image.onload function, we're going to create our canvas. So we'll say const canvas equals document.create element canvas. All right, and then we have our canvas, and now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be shrinking this to a max dimension size. So we can define this maximum dimension size, so we'll just call it max dim equals, let's say 500 pixels, and that's going to be width and height. So we're going to say that that's the max dimension, whether it is width or height. So if something is 600 by 400, we're going to scale that to be 500 by whatever, right? Or something by 500, right? Because the max dimension was 600 before. Now it's being shrunk down to be 500, but we want to scale proportionally. We don't want it to just turn into a square. And so basically what we're going to say is that we have our max size. Now we're going to say that, let's see, let width equals image.width, right? And let height equals image.height. So this is the image height and the image width that we have on here. And let's go ahead and we're going to now check the height and the width. So we can say if width is greater than height, then we know we have a landscape image. Else we either have a square or we have a something, or like a portrait mode. That's what I meant to say. There we go. All right, so now if width is greater than height, we can say if width greater than max dim, then we want to do height times equals max dim divided by width. All right, so that's just a scaling function, and our width equals max dim. All right, so we're scaling the height to be proportional, and then the width equals that, right? So if width is greater than height, do that. Else, we're going to say if height greater than max dim, we want to say width, we're going to do the same exact thing to the width. So we're going to say max dim divided by height. And then we're going to say height equals max dim. All right. So if width is greater than height, then we basically know that it is landscape, and then we're going to check if the width is too big. If the width isn't bigger than max dim, then we know that file is fine already, right? So we know that we're within this max dimension. Else, we check if height is greater than max dim. If it's not, even if it's square, right? Because I know you're thinking, oh, we're not covering the square case, but we are, because if height is not greater than max dim here, then the width, which would be equal to height, is also not greater, right? So we're fine here. And if the height equals the width, then this proportion is going to end up scaling it the same anyway, right? So we're fine there. All right, so now we've actually set our height and our width, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to set canvas.width equal to width and canvas.height equal to height. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to grab the context of the canvas. So we're going to say canvas.getContext. Whoops, wrong function. So we're grabbing our 2D context, and we're going to set the ctx.fillStyle to white. Let's see what doesn't like this for some reason. We can check if not ctx, then we just want to return. All right, so now we should be fine. And then we want to fill the rect with basically the width and the height. So we're just filling the background to be white. You could do something else if you wanted to. You could fill it with black, but basically we're going to want to draw this image. So we're going to paint over this anyway. So we're going to draw image 0, 0, width. All right. And, oops, typed image, not image. There we go. All right, and then basically what this is really doing, it's handling the case where you may have a PNG. So if you wanted to, you could do this with a PNG. What we're going to do is we're going to convert it to a JPEG, which, by JPEGs don't have any transparency. And so if you did do this with a JPEG or the PNG, we're filling the background with white. You could fill it with black. I mean, if you really wanted to, you could paint the whole background, kind of those the checkered board thing that other things use to show transparency. But we are turning it into a JPEG, so we need some sort of filling there, right? So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of resize this image. So let's go ahead and we're going to create another function for this. So this is going to be, let's call it data URL to file. And what we're going to be passing in is a data URL. So it's going to be a string. All right, and then really what this thing's going, we can actually pass in a file name as well. So let's just pass in a name. Or, you know what, let's just we'll create our own name. It'll just be a file with a date, date.now function. So it'll be a unique file name. But data URL to file. So in here, what we could do is we can actually just go ahead and, let's see, data URL. We can check in here, if not uint 8 array, just return, you know, or not file. I mean, granted, file is going to probably exist. I think we're already using file somewhere, maybe not a file reader. So you can check that, but most likely that's going to exist, you know, or not data, right? So we can check if data doesn't exist either, right? So we know some kind of data exists. It may be empty, but if so if we pass in an empty data set, then it's going to just return, you know, it's going to return undefined, and we'll be able to check basically if you know, that actually is undefined. So all right, so now let's get into the meat of this thing, right? So let's go ahead and create a file name. So we're going to say file name equals, and let's just, for now, we'll say you know, just file, and then, you know, date.now. So we're just going to pass in a unique string there. All right, and then if you wanted to, you could pass it in and name it something, but I'm not too worried about it. You could say, you know, something, whatever the file name actually was, resized. So actually, that might be cool. Let's do that. So we're going to just pass in file name instead. And we're going to go ahead and delete this. All right, and then when we call this, we're going to pass in the file name of the file we're passing in, but then we're going to add resize to the end, just so we can actually see that that file is the resized one versus the original. So then we're going to look at if data.index of, and we're going to look for a base64 marker. So what the base64 marker is it's just a string, and all it is basically this. So it's going to be a semicolon, base64, and then a comma. So you know, if this exists in the data, then we're assuming that it is a base64 string. All right. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to actually, or sorry, if it doesn't exist, right? So first we're going to check if it doesn't exist. We are going to split it apart, and we're going to essentially just kind of do a, you know, a certain function where, okay, so this is not base64. So let's grab parts equals data.split, and we're going to split it on a comma, and then we're going to grab content type, and we're going to say part0.split semicolon 1. All right, so this is going to be, you know, essentially the first part of it, and then we're going to split it on the semicolon, and we're going to try and grab the content type based off of that, and then the raw data itself is just going to be parts1, right? So it's going to be everything after the comma here. So if you look at the base64 marker, it would be what's after base64, and then, you know, obviously the content type would be what's the first one when you split on these colon here, right? So we're actually looking for the content type of, you know, what we're dealing with, and what we can do is we can return new file, and we're going to pass in the raw data, we're going to pass in the file name, and then we're going to pass in this content type as well. So this is kind of just a, you know, if you passed in some sort of data URL that wasn't base64, now the function that we're writing is almost certainly going to be base64, because that's what we're going to tell it to do, right? So I wouldn't worry about this function too much. This is kind of a fallback function, and this will kind of be an else if here. You know, finally, if none of these case, we know that it is base64, and we can kind of do the same thing, except now we're going to actually split it on the base64 marker. So we're going to just use this. You could create a variable for that if you want. A lot of people would prefer that. So the content type is going to be basically the exact same thing. So we're going to just do part0, that's split on the colon here, and we're going to grab the first part, so that's going to be our content type, and then we have our raw data equals, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to call a window function, so a to b, and we're going to pass in parts1, all right, and then our raw length equals raw.length, and we finally have our uint8 array, and let's go ahead and capitalize that. New uint8 array, and the length is going to be raw length, and let's go ahead and make that a const. All right, then we're going to use a little for loop. So let I equal 0, I is less than raw length, and plus I. And then we're going to fill this uint8 array. I equals raw.charcode at I. And finally, we are going to return a new file, exactly the same as here. Copy that line. All right, so, but it's not raw, it is uint8 array, right? So you actually have to pass it in inside brackets here as well. So again, that's just the part. So we pass in the uint8 array. We have the file name that we're adding, and then finally we have the content type as well. So that's important because we're actually specifying the content type itself. So it might be PNG, it might be JPEG, right? But you know, it's going to know based off of what we pass in. So again, we are going to now do this resized image up here. So we drew the image on the context. Now we're going to say, let's do a let resized image equals, and it's going to be data URL to file, and we're going to say canvas.toData URL, and what we're going to want to actually convert it to is a JPEG. So we're actually going to pass in a type JPEG, and the file name here is going to be file.name, right? But we're going to go ahead and we'll say, why don't we say resized file.name. All right, so we should have our resized image now, and we can say if not resized image, all right, then we know that we want to not do anything, right? So we're going to leave this file as what it is. It's going to stay as that. And so we want to just return. Otherwise, we know that resized image exists, so we can actually check the size of the resized image. So we can say else if resized image dot size is less than or equal to 0. I can say if not resized image or resized image dot size is less than or equal to 0, or what we want to check is resized image dot size is greater than or equal to file dot size, right? Because if the resized image is greater, then we'll just leave the original file, right? So we'll just return. Otherwise, we're going to say that file equals resized image. All right, so we should cover everything here. So we're setting the canvas, we're converting it to a data URL, we're passing in this data URL that has been set to a JPEG into the data URL file, and then in this we're actually going for we're going through and we're trying to create a new file based off of the canvas image that we then converted to a JPEG. So we have the background set as white if we use a PNG. So everything should work according to plan. So when we upload the file, it'll actually upload as the resized image. So let's go ahead and run this just to make sure that it still runs. So resized image, npm run dev. Oh, npm start. I'm used to the Express Basics one. All right, so we're listening to port 3000. Let's go ahead and pop that open. All right, now we're going to want to find a file that we can actually choose in here. So let's go ahead and we have a folder called BGs. Let's go ahead and just kind of look at some of these. So if we pull this open, we pull up BGs, right? We can see some of these, we have large elevation. Let's go ahead and just pop open the properties of this real quick. So we can say it's a huge file. 10,800. Let's see, this thing is 2650 by 1280. So this is probably a little bit of a better option here. So let's go ahead and we're going to kind of choose, oh, that's the one I wanted. So let's go ahead and choose this one. And we should have actually had everything done in the background, but let's go ahead and submit this thing. So if we look at this now, we can see that the actual intrinsic size of this is 500 by 250. So we were able to shrink this thing. Now obviously this is set to be an avatar, so it's you know, or it's shaped differently. But we said that we actually see that the intrinsic size of this file upload is 500 by 250 now. So it's tiny. And if we want to kind of go to the extreme here, what we could do is let's go ahead and cancel this and we can say 50, right? So now we're going to npm start again. Come back in here, reload the page, and we'll do something maybe, yeah, we'll do the same image just to kind of submit it. And we can see that it has actually been resized. Like, I mean, the blurriness is caused by, you know, the actual difference in quality, right? So if we look at the image itself, we can see that the intrinsic size is now 50 by 25. So we have actually successfully shrank it, and then the file that we uploaded was the resized image. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed that little trick, and I hope I explained it well enough, and I hope that you guys can actually utilize this in your applications. The one thing I would suggest would be to always put that logic in there and allow it to fall back to the original image, just to make sure that your functionality doesn't break. Remember, so this is an optimization, and you always want to, you know, optimize, but don't break functionality with those optimizations. So if you have any questions, definitely make sure you drop them in the comments below, and make sure you hit that subscribe button for our future releases and future content. All right, guys, see you soon.